This training series for principals is presented by NCPAPA, NCASLD, the Department of Public Instruction, and Education NC. Stick around after the lesson for discussions on the topics we'll cover today.
Since last March, one of the biggest challenges is the situation we're in is the information is changing so rapidly. What we know to be true today may be outdated tomorrow. Folks are feeling a little overwhelmed. They have so much information coming in from so many different avenues about different things that, how do you balance that? So, picking and from a school system perspective, they're certainly in a situation to be able to identify what are like the top 3 communication methods that we as a district are going to stick to so that all of our teachers and schools are using that, and it helps the parents to be able to manage the inflow of the information. It is about trying to consolidate the information and get it to folks at a regular time. And part of with that information changing, making sure that your previous communications are easily archivable. So, having either on the district website or the school website or a teacher's website, here's the historical communications that have come out, so that they can go back and find that information. But then you also have to make sure you're clearly indicating it in your current communications that this is new, right? This is something's changed. Our return to face-to-face data is no longer, it is, as so many of our districts have had to balance and juggle with that communication challenge this year.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Dean.
And I'm Brad Richardson.
You know, Brad, they say that 3 things really matter when it comes to real estate.
Oh, I know those. Location, location, location.
Right. And as school leaders, much of our success depends on 3 things as well. Communication, communication, communication. Of the 21 North Carolina leadership competencies, communication always shows up as the most significant competency in leading school improvement and the change process.
An effective communication plan is critical for promoting your school to parents and the community, connecting with current students, and engaging staff members. For clear, successful communication with stakeholders, there are 3 key activities to attend to.
Engage your school's leadership team and specific individuals to put into place structures for ongoing and open communication. Identify key stakeholder needs and concerns, which you can do by conducting surveys and focus groups of staff and families. And utilize an up-to-date online area or automated calls where your stakeholders can access information and ask questions.
By having a strong and effective communication plan, your school can address uncertainty with clear, accessible information for stakeholders. There are 5 key elements of a school's remote learning communication plan. These 5 key elements are:
knowing who are your key audiences for communications and why they matter.
Knowing what you want to achieve with your communications and engagement efforts.
Identifying who are the best messengers for your messages based on each audience.
Identifying your key messages for each audience.
And knowing what tools and tactics will you use for communications and engagement.
A strong communication plan helps to reduce the effects of harmful stressors and build meaningful connections between staff, students, families, and the community. School leaders also need to check the pulse of staff members and teachers.
They can begin by listening as communication problems can be mitigated by hearing the voices of teachers and staff. It informs administration of areas of need, support, and further development.
Actively listening to staff concerns and anxieties also helps administrators stay on top of the needed changes for future communications.
From virtual office hours to video celebrations, These types of ongoing efforts support teachers in their daily interactions with students and parents.
We have a student support team that frequently we meet on a weekly basis, but we're also reaching out to teams to find out, what are the needs of our team. Each team has a case manager that can talk about anywhere. The teachers can bring attendance issues or behavior issues or academic concerns to that case manager, and that case manager can bring that information to our intervention team or our student support services team. Because during this time, our kids are experiencing a lot of different needs that we might not have seen in a normal school year.
Another essential leadership trait in times of uncertainty is empathy, which is defined as the experience of understanding another person's thoughts, feelings, and conditions from his or her point of view rather than from one's own.
Empathy plays a major role in meeting the mission and goals of the school. By listening to and trying to place yourself in the position of your various stakeholders, you have the unique opportunity to look at how to better meet the needs of those individuals, as well as stakeholder groups.
When your team feels valued, appreciated, listened to, and cared for, they become more loyal, engaged, productive, and happy.
They are also more willing to share ideas and take risks to find or implement innovative solutions.
Here are some examples of what you can do to display empathy.
Get to know people better and on different fronts.
Understand others' needs.
Actively listen.
Be proactive in reaching out to people you think need help or support.
Be genuine.
Empathetic school leaders must also help build and sustain trust in both individuals and in their schools.
As Stephen Covey would remind us, trust is essential and ever present where there is a significant positive relationship, whether between individuals, organizations, or even nations. But it is also fragile, hard to win, and easy to lose.
Trust is a confident belief in someone or something, or the belief in an entity. Trust means doing what is right,
delivering what is promised,
and being the same every time, whatever the circumstances.
Students who experience empathy and feel trust with school leaders, teachers, and the school community are more likely to feel more accepted and respected and have a better attitude towards school.
It is based on how we view and what we believe about students, which informs our expectations, reactions, and attitudes about them. A strong student-teacher-principal relationship increases student motivation, learning, and achievement, as well as feelings of being culturally accepted and respected.
So the well-being of students depends not only on access to high-quality learning, but also on the physical health and emotional health to support the total student. By developing a culturally responsive school and working together with families and the whole community, we find solutions to help support children during times of crisis.
We're working toward implementing, thinking more about that social emotional piece, learner profiles, which will provide every teacher with an ongoing assessment of students' interests and learning styles, in addition to their academic performance history. We also, right now, we've got student check-ins where teachers are getting information from their kids about how they're feeling and what they need from their teacher or other school staff. So I think all those pieces come together holistically to form a picture of the pathway that we need to take to ensure that all students are, achieving high levels of learning and that they're growing socially and emotionally as well.
We've talked about the importance of building strong, positive relationships with both students and staff to improve school achievement, attitudes about school and job satisfaction, and self-efficacy.
Research tells us that students who believe they have a voice in school are 7 times more likely to be academically motivated than students who do not believe they have a voice.
Further, staff who believe they have a voice will have a deep commitment to the goals of the school and a strong belief that they control the conditions for student success.
The Glossary of Education Reform identifies student voice as driver of school culture. It says that student voice refers to the values, opinions, beliefs, perspectives, and cultural backgrounds of individual students and groups of students in a school, and to instructional approaches and techniques that are based on student choices, interests, passions, and ambitions.
Student voice increases a student's engagement in learning, encourages collaboration between students and their teachers, and helps to create and maintain a positive environment and culture. As leaders, we must create a place and a space for the voices of our students.
We need to also recognize that the teacher voice is a critical part of the school culture and school improvement process.
When teachers are engaged in school decisions and collaborate with administrators and each other, school culture and climate improves. This results in higher performance and achievement, a better working environment for teachers, and a better learning environment for students.
In hearing student voice, in hearing students for who they are, and for them to know that we care about what they have to say and we care about them and value their culture. We make sure that our teachers are meeting with the kids in small groups on a weekly basis, not only just for academic purposes, but for social needs. And our student support services, they do lunch bunch and social groups. We also have a Hawk News every day where we have 4th and 5th graders develop their own opinion segment on it. And we do value what the students say and we care about them. And I think, again, in morning meeting, that's another opportunity to share different perspectives and share who they are about, what's really going on. So I do feel like that it is important on a weekly basis in this environment when you're not in touch with kids every day, to meet them at least once a week to hear what's going on with them, to support them and meet them where they're at.
Thank you for watching this webinar, and thank you for all that you do for our students and our school communities in creating equitable educational opportunities and for creating strong, supportive school cultures.
This has been a production of NCPAPA, the North Carolina Principals and Assistant Principals Association.
What aspects of your daily communication with your school's faculty and staff have been most challenging, and what strategies or tools have been most helpful in meeting these challenges?
Yeah, so this has been a very challenging time, from going to having students and staff in the school to now having to see folks on computer screens in most cases. And I think for me, the most challenging thing has obviously been the lack of personal connection. I think we all have that level of connection within the school. I'm able to, at any given time, walk down the hall and see my teachers, see my students, get fist bumps and high fives, and able to follow up in something that may have happened in their respective lives, or something that may have been awesome in their classroom setting the day before, or the class period before, but having to adapt that now to the online platform. And in the online platform, while I'm so grateful that we have the ability to still connect with students and to still provide them with great quality instructional practices, teaching and learning practices, what is oftentimes missed in this platform, however, is just that personal connectedness that we typically have, that warmth and that feeling of warmth within the school building. And so we've done a lot of work around that and connecting with our stakeholder groups and having as many meetings and check-in opportunities we can possibly have, so that we are still feeling and extending that level of connectedness to the best way and to the extent possible. Reaching out and again, having as many platforms that aren't always about information that teachers have to utilize in order to get across to their students, or thinking about professional learning, but more so, how do we create the spaces that allows us to be human and connected and related to each other, especially in this new normal that we're trying our best to navigate. I think the other piece to what's challenging now is, you know, in the school building, it's easier in most cases to give information out, right? To inform people what's happening. I can make announcements. I can, you know, communicate with the folks within the building in a very short period of time. So the transfer of information now it takes a little bit longer to get to folks, if you will. And in some cases, it's so much information that we are oftentimes having to think about how to prioritize the information that's coming to us. And so we've utilized this time to present information in multiple platforms, right? You've got your email, you've got your telephone chains, you've got all the other aspects, but how can we provide this in such a way that it's asynchronous in nature, but it's meaningful for the person and the platform that we're giving them, because you're getting inundated with so much information, so much of the day-to-day operations of grading and preparing for lessons. How do we make that much easier for our teachers so that they can have time to hear what it is, the important information to move forward in their practice, but to get it in a platform that's most palatable for that teacher. And so we have looked at ways to have asynchronous meetings, to videotape a lot of the things that are very important and the essence of what's going on in the classroom, in the school space, to have multiple meetings so that if you didn't catch it the first time, you can do it either at your leisure or at a time that's more beneficial for you. And so I think that in itself, just the challenge of having so much information coming to you, but the way that we've been able to remedy that is through how we are providing this in multiple platforms, multiple times. That's really, you know, at the disposal of our teachers. And then I think just we miss having, we've always claimed Enloe to be the school that never sleeps. And so in that we have school functions, students involved in so many clubs and organizations. So we've been able to extend that still to our folks on an online platform. So we didn't lose our programming and what makes us special and all the events and activities that would happen if we were face-to-face in the school environment. So it's been really cool to see our whole community buying into this new way of doing things, and to still extend what we would normally do within the confines of the building to our students.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing your strategies. Ms. Treadway?
So I could just echo a lot of what Will is saying in regards to just sharing information with multiple platforms, trying to find creative ways to connect both with families and with staff. One of the biggest challenges really is at that part of what is real human connection. The more that we are plugged in, the more disconnected we seem and feel. We starting off the year we still have not had a whole staff meeting since March. We've not been all together in the same room with faces and smiles and laughing and even complaining, because that's what families do, in the same room together. And for the first time ever, I've had staff saying, I actually really miss our staff meetings. And who would have thought that would be a thing? But, you know, like their school is the school that never sleeps. You know, that's their mantra, are well known for that. We live in a very small community, and our school we're the Pisgah Forest Rangers, and we believe in Ranger family. So whether it's our staff here at school or our families, our students, you know, we're all Ranger family. So we just have always been very intentional about connecting with each other as humans and taking care of that social and emotional piece of being in a school and as learners. Some of the things that we've done to remedy some of those challenges as best we can has been, number one, being very, very visible, just like we always have, but I block out lots of extra time to get out in the hallways and to get into classrooms and in car rider lines and home visits. And traditionally I've done a lot of home visits, but this year I've taken teachers with me because they're needing to connect with their families. We've taken desks, supplies, all kinds of things to those families that are feeling, facing some different challenges. And that's really helped us just boost our morale, feeling connect with our families that are out, at home only, and then just connecting with our community and each other.
So with such a diverse range of home settings and resources for your students and their parents during this time of remote learning or semi-remote learning, as I just learned, what school-wide communication strategies have you used to meet the diverse needs of these students and parents?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things that I'd like to, communicate, that I'm very happy that our district has been very committed to our students, where they are coming from and their backgrounds, is to provide all students with that we're needing a Chromebooks, and then the digital access, the internet that comes with that. And so we've been very fortunate to be able to provide those devices for our students. And we oftentimes think about it where if a student doesn't have any devices in the house, that they were given the device to, engage in remote learning. But I think also it's important to note that even if families had devices in their household, that device may have been shared by younger siblings or older siblings or their parents, right? And so it was important that any student that needed a device was able to get a device, and was able to connect to the internet to engage on a regular basis. And again, we've been remote since the start of the year, so it was imperative that all of our students had access to those devices. I think in addition to that, we've been communicating with our community. One of the groups that we wanted to make sure that had access and understood all the expectations going into remote learning and what that means and all the supports from the school was we created family academies for our English language learners. And we were able to provide sessions that was geared towards how to be successful. What does homework and power school look like? How do you connect with your teachers? So many of these different sessions, and we were able to translate that into the native language of our families. And so we were able to extend the wraparound supports for our students that are acquiring the English language and their families doing the same thing, but being able to connect as we have a growing population of English language learners at our school. I think in addition to that, we too were able to make some home visits this year. There's a challenge sometimes with a change in the platform of teaching and learning, which was always in person, and getting to adapt to new practices and policies regarding this whole remote learning setup. So it was important that when we found out that a student was disengaged or wasn't connecting to their classes, that we had some level of interaction with the family. And Ms. Treadway said it perfectly of, connecting and bringing that social emotional support as best as we could, and the connectedness to our families as well. So identifying those that were disconnected, not involved or attending classes, trying to see what the concerns and issues were, and to address them as best as we could. And so home visits have proven to be successful because we now are able to connect with families. And oftentimes the families that we did connect with, we may not have had working numbers or communication information at the school level. So we were able to get that and stay connected with our folks as well. Some of the other things that I think has been very important is to create a bell schedule that allows for access, allows for intervention, and allows for the additional support that our students and families need. And so fortunately in our district, if we have a 5-day instructional week, meaning that there's no holidays or teacher work days within the week, our district has for the most part allowed us to use one of those days as an asynchronous learning day. So students are still learning, they're still doing work, and they're able to do it at their own pace. But at the same time, those are days where teachers can interact one-on-one with students. They can do that via the computer, they can do that via phone call, And they can actually engage students to see where students may be struggling and how students may be able to demonstrate mastery. It's kind of like what we would have done in the school setting anyways, when we work individually and we try to do tier 2 and 3 instructional strategies and practices. We're just doing it differently, and we're able to use that asynchronous day to really engage those students that are a little bit behind, or not meeting the standard of mastery for different content standards. So we've been able to use that. We also have in our bell schedule office hours. And so every day we're able to extend some office hours to our students, and they can elect to go and meet with the teacher, or the teacher can identify small groups of intervention so that they can, again, support what it is our students may be struggling with content standards and mastery of those standards. So you have all those things combined. I think we continue to think about intervention. We're bringing some small groups of students in starting next week, so that they, again, can meet promotion standards, have access to some teaching and learning, get the feel of being back somewhat in the school, but also at the same time adhering to all of the safety protocols and measures, but a chance for us to have a connection outside of the extension of the school to the home, but bringing back small groups of students that can be successful. So I think all of those we communicate. We've continued to communicate regularly with our stakeholder groups via all the things. I think email is one, online website information, increased presence on social media. I'm communicating, calling every week to parents. We're doing video explanations of different changes that may have occurred. And so we're trying to get that out to as many people and as often as we possibly can. But thinking about the whole notion I was saying in the first question about so much information, we've tried to vary it so people have access and things are disposable, or they can reach the different platforms as appropriate as they deem necessary.
Sorry. The school radio never stops, does it?
Never.
Never.
Just another, we'll just add that to the communication list of things that you must manage within your role.
For real, it starts at 5 a.m. and stops at 5 p.m.
Ms. Trey, do you have anything you want to add to that?
So yeah, very similar to what Will is saying. Office hours are provided, small group intervention is provided regardless of if the student's home or if they're at school. We've reached out and connected with Augustine literacy tutors and our English language families, and helped them continue the connections they already had established with local agencies and our school support for them. We did a revision of our master schedule to find ways to follow restrictions but continue to offer interventions which are needed more now than ever. And as far as like platforms, we, between social media, we use Class Dojo school-wide because our students are elementary, and that's a platform that's easy for families and students to access. I do a lot of video messages with our families and our staff because they seem to be more engaged, and it's an opportunity for them to see my face because they don't get to see that anymore. So it's always partially covered. Excuse me. So again, just trying to maintain that human connection. We're very, very fortunate as well as in terms of just our school district has really risen to the call to make sure all of our students have the resources, and the phone never stops, that they need. Like every student, kindergarten all the way up through 12, is provided with a Chromebook. This is the first year our little ones, our elementary, have taken them home. And it's the first year that we've been one-to-one K2. We've always been one-to-one 3, 5, and up, middle and high school. But now our little ones are online, and there are some challenges there. We've always believed in the importance of limiting screen time for our little bitty ones. And again, the challenge is, do their families know how to navigate the online platforms to support those kids? So sometimes that means families coming in and doing a little tech tutorial with our teachers and our staff on how do you do these things and how do you access these things that we're offering to you. We've provided hotspots and helped local families get internet service where the hotspots won't work because maybe they have poor reception or whatever. A lot of open meetings, Facebook Live, where people can interact with us and ask questions and get some help. So yeah, just lots and lots of working together and adjusting course every single day.
Thank you both for sharing. We've heard a lot over the past 9 months for the need for school leaders to exercise grace, patience, understanding. How do you approach this while also maintaining high standards for both all students as well as faculty and staff?
Yeah, I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that remote learning and all the things that have come with this pandemic are new to us all, right? This is a new experience, not only for teachers, but we as principals, for parents, for students. And so in acknowledging that and acknowledging the fact that many of us didn't go to school to become experts in remote teaching and learning, right? This is a new strategy. This is new territory for us all, uncharted waters that we are navigating this year. And so in thinking and knowing that, and I've heard from teachers that this is like their first year of teaching all over again because there's so many priorities, so much information coming to them. The way that they have to approach things is totally different than what they have ever experienced before. And so in knowing that, and really the concept of all of that, it's important that we as leaders extend the level of grace and flexibility and patience for all of our folks. And in doing that, it's not lowering expectations at all. I think you would hear from every teacher that the expectations remain high. The level of rigor and challenge and problem solving and critical thinking that and the opportunities thereof that they're providing students still remains at a very high quality. It's just that in order to adapt it to this new normal that we're in, it's going to take some time to make the adjustments, to make it happen, and to make it as seamless as we have done in so many years in education, in person, face-to-face, and learning and instruction. So I think that's what we mean by offering grace, flexibility, is that we still rise to the occasion, but how are we able to do that in a period of time of adjustment, and how can we evolve over time? So a few things that come to mind when I think about the level of grace and flexibility that we've extended to our folks at the school, which I feel like have been extended to us as principals by our district leaders, and which have served as great models for what we can do at the school level. Is thinking about professional learning this year. And while professional learning may have had, we may have devised a professional learning framework last year in preparation or for this year, we've also been adaptive to the needs of our teachers. So giving out surveys to teachers to figure out what they need in order to be successful in this new normal was pivotal in our work and our planning for this year. And so we were thinking about what are best teaching and learning practices in remote learning that we can provide to teachers. How can we unpack that so that it's a correlation to their current experiences, right? And still working at the highest level possible. So working with our teachers, doing resource shares to hear about what they're doing in their classes that have engaged students, what grading practices may be like now that we have transitioned to a totally new platform. What are some of those teaching and learning practices that will benefit all of our students? So professional learning has been based and built out of what the needs are of our teachers, how we as administrators can support them, and how best to move forward in the sustainability and the evolution, I should say, of this work in remote learning. The next thing I think was important this year, and thinking about grace and flexibility, is thinking about the instructional instrument that we evaluate our teachers on. And so that, I don't know, was built out of the possibility of ever going to remote learning. So we have had to look, we have had to re-examine the instrument itself and to think about what would be look fors in this new normal that we're in. How might we support teachers in this new learning? Because again, we as administrators didn't experience, or at least I'm speaking for myself and my team, we didn't experience teaching on the computer. It was all, face to face. You can interact with students differently. You could put students in groups and, assess what's going on. And so we had to really think about how do we extend, or how do we at least take this this evaluation tool and adapt it to the current reality that we're experiencing in the schoolhouse. So we've been able to do that, and we've been able to extend even things like instructional learning rounds to happen, so that we can get teachers to think about, some best practices across the campus or across other classrooms, and to see and feel what remote learning may feel like, and the essence of it being at high quality, and for us to examine teacher practices and how, again, it correlates to the instrument itself. And I think there's still a focus on our continuous improvement plan. So we continue to look at our school improvement plan. We unpack the data that we have that's available to us this year. We know that data is going to look a little different than it has in years past, but we're looking at attendance data and engagement strategies, and we're looking for ways that, again, we can extend the level of understanding first for our campus community, but also how do we extend this level of grace and of patience. And while we don't have everything that we may have had in years past when it comes to student performance data, how can we think and revision all of that? Do we have to necessarily have the high stakes tests to manage all of those things? Can we still create benchmarks that are important for us to know how students are faring and performing, but giving people that opportunity to get there? And so I think that's when we're talking about grace and flexibility and patience and all of those great words. I think it's not a replacement for the high quality instruction that we usually have seen. It's just more of how do we adapt and how do we evolve over time, given those different structures and systems that we have in place at the school or in the remote sphere of work.
Thank you for sharing. Go ahead, Mr. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. I think at the core of understanding what grace and patience and understanding even is, and how to apply that to this whole new norm, which makes me crazy to even say that anymore, is really relationships. And that always has been true. That's the one thing that's been consistent in all of this. Going all the way back to whenever I started school many, many years ago, started teaching, we were still playing Oregon Trail. So, it's so many changes have happened that ages me a little bit, and I've adapted with the time. Very tech savvy now. Everything we do, everything we've always done still boils down to the relationships you have with your students, with your staff, with your families. And without that, your expectations, no matter how high they are for academic achievement, you will never arrive to those things. So we've had to be very, very cognizant about what programs we use, because programs versus people will always achieve more and have a connection that's more meaningful and have the impact that we're looking for with quality teaching and learning. The trick with our online learners is keeping them active and keeping them engaged, especially for elementary students whose attention span can be a bit brief. But we also believe in the importance of movement and getting outside and interacting with peers. And that's a little challenging. So trying to figure out some ways to show grace, understanding, and making those kinds of things happen. One of the unexpected challenges that we had to face in the beginning of all this was that grace and understanding is a two-way street. We know that our families are approaching this for the first time. They might not always have the skills or knowledge to help support their students with this kind of thing. It's very easy for a parent to get behind a keyboard and send off a nasty message to a teacher because they're frustrated. That keyboard courage, we had to really figure out a way to combat that. And teachers often felt kind of attacked by families in the beginning until we got to a place of understanding that. Grace, again, it goes both ways. As an administrator, I did a lot of block, and filtering for teachers who did not deserve to be communicated with the way that they were by just a few parents. Getting in front of that is really just kind of reaching out with actual conversations, not an overdependence on emails and messages through electronic means, but picking up the phone, inviting people in for meetings and saying, you know, here are things that we need to work through together so that we can all help your child. We all have the same goal in mind. So just trying to kind of calm everyone down, slow the pace, but not lower expectations, but, you know, apply those expectations to how we treat one another, because it's a combined effort between families at home and our teachers here, trying to support our students as they learn. Teaching is rocket science, is a lot like rocket science. It's very complicated. These teachers are professionals. They've gone through years and years of training and continue to go through training. And most of our parents don't have that kind of background. So we're throwing a lot on them to ask them to be the learning coach at home and help their students stay on track and understand what everything means. When you're teaching a child how to read in kindergarten, first and second grade, that can be tough, because little ones, we do a lot of movement, a lot of hands-on things, and trying to make that work between home and school it's just a whole different practice. So we've gotten pretty creative, but just again, relying on the relationships, cultivating and taking care of those relationships through every challenge that we face. So there will always be challenges.
You've been certainly in a unique leadership role in your current role, as you started prior to the outbreak of COVID-19 and the necessary changes back in last March. What would you say are some of the key insights that you've gained as you help school leaders navigate through this crisis?
Well, it has been quite a navigation for all of us. We've learned that we're capable of more than we thought we were, and that we have to really focus on flexibility. And I think starting out, I think we need to all acknowledge that we've had to learn that grace is vital. There is no roadmap for this, and you're going to have bumps, and people's intentions have been tremendous and the work has been nonstop, but that flexibility and grace have been just lifted up as just vital. The unfortunate truth is that many children were already behind in reading and math before COVID. So we're looking for ways we can combine that learning loss, trying to mitigate that due to COVID, with improved outcomes for all students. So schools, principals, I've been in that role. I know how much the work that's involved with it in the best of circumstances, but principals have had no choice but to be adaptive, flexible, pivot quickly as the circumstances changed. Something else that has really risen to the level of just widespread understanding is there's been inequities. We all acknowledge there's inequities in resources, opportunities, remote access. Who knew we'd be talking about communities' access to broadband and having to look at things like low orbit satellite to provide broadband or internet to families that live in rural areas. Personnel, we've always known the high quality teachers, the most important thing in the classroom, but we've had classrooms where they have not had teachers that are trained at all times, and that's been exacerbated. So gaps will likely be wider than ever. And we as educators, principals, teachers have to rethink how that instruction is going to be delivered, how the progress is going to be measured. It's been becoming obvious that we're at a new point. It's a complete paradigm shift, and we use that term a lot in education, but we are there. There's no way what we go back to will be what we left. As I mentioned, a great teacher in every classroom is so vital. And there's countless examples of some amazing educators that have stepped up and done things that they probably didn't realize they had the capabilities or the time to do, and they've gone over and beyond, but it has made a world of difference. So that great teacher in every classroom, I can imagine every principal, that's their number one priority, putting that person in the front of the room. One of the other things that we knew about, but has really been exacerbated in many ways, is mental health. Student mental health needs are a priority all the time. We know that some of that manifests itself in the classroom, and now we're seeing it maybe even online. We have students that are working to help pay bills and help their parents make ends meet. So schools and principals have had to adapt what a school day looks like. I've spoken to principals and superintendents that have said, we have virtual academies that go into the late evening to accommodate students who have to work during the day. We had to rethink what time on instruction looks like and more focus on personalized delivery and personalized response and students showing mastery. We also know with the mental health piece that students that had less than ideal situations to begin with, that probably has been exacerbated as they've had to be in environments sometimes or had to do things that aren't necessarily the age appropriate. You've got 9-year-olds raising their younger siblings because mom and dad are working. So there's a lot of mental health support that we know will be vital going forward. And things like social interaction, sports, arts, band, they all play a vital role in student identity, in student independence, self-worth, social development. For many students, this hasn't been available for them for a year. So we know that when they come back and when we gather them back and we have them all together, we're going to have to focus on the whole child more than we've probably been able to in the past. And that is, I can imagine principals have been weighing on that quite a bit. And I don't want to miss out to reinforce that this has impacted everyone. So we have teachers and staff, their mental health and their support is extremely necessary. We've lost in some communities teachers and staff and bus drivers to COVID. And we've had some teachers leave the profession due to COVID. So it's not all doom and gloom, though. I will say that parents, community, and the private sector, we've seen such a great partnership. Parent choice and access is here to stay. We know that, but we've learned that engaging families, they've become true partners. We've gone from us delivering content and us delivering the day-to-day work and communicating and educating students to parents having to do some of that with understanding the instructional core, parents understanding how to deliver instruction and how to support their child. And it's really helped engage parents. It's helped us engage some private partners. And I think that's going to be a big key going forward. I'll mention it later, but EdCore, North Carolina EdCore, NC EdCore is an example where business partners and college students and former educators and professionals have said, I have the opportunity to give back, and I can help hopefully mitigate some of the losses. I can volunteer and be a mentor and be a tutor. I think you'll see more and more of that, us looking at schools as a statewide approach and not school by school, that we know that we all have to engage one another and use those family members as true partners as we move forward. So it's a new world we're living in, and we've all had to adjust. And I've been so encouraged by what I've seen in North Carolina.
Right. To kind of build on that point, during this time of really uncertainty and, as you mentioned, flux, as things change, how do you see, quote unquote, innovation being a reasonable strategy for schools to meet the current and post-COVID-19 needs of our students and our community?
Well, innovation has suddenly moved from the margins and some of those it's nice to do and to the forefront. I would venture to say a year ago, some would say remote learning was an innovation strategy. Some would say personalized learning was an innovation strategy. Some would say that multi-age classroom or looping was an innovation strategy. And those have now become the new norms. Those have now become in the forefront of the new way of doing business because we've been thrust into it. So if there's a silver lining, the heavy emphasis on utilizing remote learning and utilizing a personalized approach to education is that we've sped up the process of what we've been trying to do in many communities. There's been great examples across the state. Now we're seeing it more systematic and systemic across the state. So students are getting more opportunities. They're working at their own pace and independently. In some ways, that's independent because in education, one of the things that we know is the teacher being responsible for delivery and instruction. In some cases, that means the student is a passive learner, and not in all cases, but has been more of a passive learner in some courses. Well, now we're seeing students working way more independently, having to engage in new ways and owning their own pace, their own process. They've become better problem solvers. So we understand that things like a more standard-based approach and getting students to understand the why and how this leads to the next process or the next level of understanding, how this will help them in the real world, helping them understand context. That is a new level of engagement. Seeing it as a parent, my child knows why she's learning what she's learning and how it's going to help her for the next step in life or next course or whatever it may be. Whereas maybe I don't know that she always did engage. I think sometimes she was a compliant learner. We've also, some of the innovation, we know we're going to go beyond normalcy. And what I mean by that is we're never going back to the way it was. Things like targeted support, as I mentioned with NC Ed Core. Our new normal around innovation is being more explicit with instruction, things like literacy training through the science of reading. Some might say, well, that's not innovative. Well, I would say that having a statewide commitment to a research-based approach to literacy that leads to better outcomes and better readers and more engaged students, if that's not innovative, I don't know what is. So there's a more deliberate approach to explicit instruction. I think academic progress. I see principals. I've talked to superintendents who said, we're redefining mastery of skills and concepts. And rather than seat time or semesters and grades and grade levels, we're moving more towards students matriculating self-paced, sometimes students showing demonstration of mastery and moving on to the next course or the next concept. We're looking at students being more in control of their own learning. And that is innovative because students, we're here to serve them, and empowering them makes them more engaged and makes them more understanding of how this is beneficial to them. And the other innovation, I think as we talk about innovation, we've seen parent partnerships and, schools have parent nights and districts have, community events, but it's this. What I've seen with COVID is parents and communities have really been thrust into seeing how vital schools are, how much of a role schools play, not in just academics, but in the community itself. I live in a community where the high school is a big part of the identity of the entire town. When the high school football team wins, the whole town has a different pep in their step. And that's not an exaggeration. When our schools win awards and when they're doing well and students do well, it impacts businesses. It impacts our whole community. You see it carry over to churches and social groups. This newfound public recognition of how essential schools are in society, it's given us a window of opportunity to leverage that support, make them stronger. We realize schools are the lifeline for the community. They're culture hubs, they're meeting places, they're in many cases like churches, hubs for the community. And they're pipelines for the workforce. In my community and others around us, there's such a need for students with credentials of value and opportunities to step into these jobs that are needed. Businesses know that the schools are their pipeline, and they want to re-engage in a meaningful way to make sure that they're not just waiting to receive what comes to them, but they're actively involved in being part of the training and the support and the resources necessary to get schools where they need to be and to provide that love of learning. For us in my community, high school football and high school basketball, that's a meeting place. It's where old friends come together, community members come to connect more intently And we see that is has been missing and longing for many. So I look forward to the way we re-engage that personal connection, and that education isn't separate from other parts of our life. That we see, I think that the greater emphasis is shown, we see that education is a vital key hub of each community. It is, in effect, the community in many ways. So that newfound respect and emphasis, I think, will help us all as we move forward into post-COVID.
So I know that DPI is only in its first month of being led by our new state superintendent, Catherine Truitt. And fortunately, she's well-versed in what's been taking place across the state with COVID-19 and the context that it's had for the educational setting. What do you see as her thoughts and approaches in leading the state and leading the agency at this time?
Well, I will tell you, she is a true champion for education. She's very, very active as a leader and focused intently on recovery efforts. She values multiple perspectives. One of the things that has been extremely apparent is she really wants to know. She didn't come in to say, I have the script and the plan to get us through this. She has amazing ideas, but she's also sat down and had engaging conversations with, I can't even name the amount of people and the groups and the legislators and students that she said, I want to hear your perspective. What is working? What do you think we need to do to get through this? And she's really focused on that explicit instruction. Let's teach intently on the concepts and the content that is most vital for student success. And let's give targeted support. We're not leaving learning to chance. The inequities are obvious, but we can't be passive in trying to resolve that. If you've seen much of the team she's brought in and she's helped create and develop, we have an extremely diverse team. The focus on equity is at the forefront of everything that she brings to us, that she discusses. Anytime you hear her speak, it's a key tenet of her approach. Equity is vital and it is a driving force. It's exciting and inspiring because we know the pandemic has illuminated those inequities, and she's not going to let that continue if she has any say-so in that at all. And it's encouraging knowing she is an educator. She's a parent, she's a leader, she's been very successful in her career, and she brings those experiences and those viewpoints to the department and helps give us a vision and help lead us in a way that we are collectively speaking with one voice. Her motto was one team, one voice. And that's not just the department, it's the department along with the General Assembly, it's the department along with the State Board of Ed, it's the department along with our 115 school districts and 200 charters. She wants one voice, one team. We are not fragmented pieces in the same industry. We are all in this game together. So it's been extremely exciting to have someone help push me to be better. And I'm very much looking forward to what's ahead with her leadership.
Well, thank you, David. As we get ready to wrap up, you've got the principals out there in this webinar today who are leading their school teams. What kind of closing thought do you have for them as they move forward the remainder of this academic year and looking forward to another new academic year?
Ask why not. Don't necessarily fall into the trap of doing what was done before you got there. If you're new to your position, seek opportunities to make meaningful change and things as simple as with this remote learning. I've seen a lot of virtual academies kind of well up and just take off and have success. And I suspect those are going to be around for a long period of time. But if you think about it, with a virtual academy and virtual teachers, if you're in a rural community, you now have a broader spectrum of teachers you can recruit from because they don't have to be in your building. So think bigger. What are there teachers who maybe live quite a bit away or even another state who might can serve my district that we might not have had access before? I've seen those be successful, and I think principals are going to look bigger at a wider scale of who are our teachers, who are our partners. I think also partnering with each other. I've seen principals and schools connect and say, we're not adversaries, we're not competing, we're both wanting to do well. So how can we partner up our resources, our teacher training, our efforts? How can we work together to move this work forward faster and more meaningful? So we're here at the department to help support you. We're trying to do everything we can to shield you from things that you don't need to worry about and that we can handle and mitigate and help resolve. And we'll continue to do that. But your voice is important. I ask that your advocacy groups like NCPAPA, utilize those to let your ideas, your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, bring those forward. And I'm excited about what this looks like as we come out on the backside of COVID-19 and reimagine a new normal for North Carolina and for education as a whole.
What 2 or 3 school leader attributes do you see as keys to leveraging a school culture that seeks a sound basic education for each and every child?
I love the question and the connection to sound basic education. And I would say first that is passion. I believe that some of our best leaders, they know how to learn. They're good learners. But passion is an attribute that, is that fire in the belly that keeps us all motivated. And I find throughout the course of 40 years that that passion around advocating for children and what's right for children and knowing your children and families and community is one of the most important characteristics you can have. Secondly, I think, and I'm not sure how we would characterize relationship building as an attribute, but to me, it's at the heart of everything that we do. Again, we can learn about standards and we can learn about technology, but if we are not building appropriate relationships with all of the people that we serve, our effectiveness, I believe, is diminished. So how do school leaders, make themselves accessible, know their children and their families, understand the needs of their teachers and their staff and their buildings? It's what makes the job so humongous. But also, I think successful leaders devote significant time to relationship building.
I would agree. We know how important it is for teachers and school leaders to attend to the social emotional learning needs of their students. What role do you think empathy plays as leaders and teachers work with their students in a remote learning environment?
I love the distinction between the word empathy and lots of other feelings we have about the plight of our students, and particularly during a pandemic. I think we're all looking to the fall in terms of, what toolkit do we need? How do we assess? How do we support? And I think that, that's sort of connected back to relationship building. How do I develop appropriate understanding and support, which to me is empathy? I saw something recently that talked about the difference between if you are in a position of power and you feel bad for someone, it's sympathy. But when you get down on your knees and look them in the eye and attempt to live what they're living, that's empathy. And I think that's the challenge that faces all of us as we return, hopefully, in the months ahead, to children and staff. And I think that, as leaders, our span of control is really about adults, while our mission is children and we want to know them and be with them, and they're sort of what fill our buckets. Our primary group that we need to serve and support are going to be teachers. And so what does that look like? What strategy can we build around empathy? And I find even in my work today, something I've done for years is divide people up into small groups, because your job is big and you don't have a lot of time. But when you're sitting in a waiting room or you're in a grocery store line, or, who's next? Even now, I text superintendents across the state of North Carolina, and I I keep a flag in my, in my address book where I left off, but I just keep repeating that 2 or 3. It's pretty amazing what it means to just for someone to get something from you, an email, a text out of the blue, just checking on you, how you doing? And I think there's, folks have lots more creativity than I do around what that might be, but you really have to take care of these people. And it doesn't take much. They just want to be appreciated and protected, I believe.
I love that. And keeping up via a text message every once in a while down the list is impressive. So that's great to hear. Moving on to another question is, what advice do you have for school leaders on communicating with their parents?
Oh, these are such tough times, right? You just can't win. I think it feels like, and I would say now more than ever, being authentic and transparent and genuine and just telling your real story is so important. Everybody has a story right now, and it's challenging. Some of us have had the ability to work from home. Some have not. Some have lost jobs. And I think that as much as if I were in a building or in a superintendent's or any school leadership position right now, I would want people to see my world just as clearly as possible, what I'm facing, what criteria I put into decision making. And I think one of the ways that you can do that is to listen, right? So have some small group listening sessions at your school and find out from parents what's going on. It's a way to hear them, but then also to say, okay, I was thinking about this, and what you've shared with me has really been helpful to me. In normal times, I also suggest that principals take their roster and call. We call home when things aren't great, but come up with 2 or 3 questions. What's one thing our school does really well? What's something we could improve upon? And you have 5 seconds with your principal. Tell me something I need to know. And just like the texts for care, really do your own little action research. It's powerful what you can learn when you reach out. And I know people get tired of phones and messages, but I do think parents in particular, like that human touch.
Great, thank you. And transitioning to a different important group of people, what advice would you give school leaders on taking care of themselves during these challenging times?
Oh, beautiful, right? You have to take care of yourself. And I know that over time we feel so driven by doing the job and doing it well, and the job sort of overtakes us. But I have learned after 40 plus years that, whatever it is that allows you to lose it, and I mean lose the work, is what you need to do. So it's, if it's lifting weights or dancing, or, sitting on your back porch with a margarita, I think you have to let it go. And one of my goals in the pandemic has been a fast time that I stop the screens, because I think we all feel on call all the time, and without some deadlines to say, okay, at 9 o'clock, we're putting these away. And, my husband often kids me like, do I have to lock those in the safe? But I think we need to find some things that bring us joy and program them regularly into our routines, and then not punish ourselves for taking time and saying, I'm leaving work here. I'm going to go over here and be a human for a little while because it's good for me. But I can't underscore enough and appreciate so much that you asked the question, because I think particularly for new leaders who feel they have to demonstrate, the level of performance and proficiency, and you add a pandemic to that, that's a huge amount of pressure that's self-inflicted. And often I think those are the folks that that we don't push enough to take care of themselves. So I appreciate you asking the question.
The first question I'd like you to reflect on is the learning and opportunity gaps among our most vulnerable students populations seems to be a big concern in many of our school systems. What have you found to be most effective in narrowing these learning and opportunity gaps, and what engagement strategies seem to work best for your most vulnerable students?
Okay, good question. And so I've been asked similar questions on other panels, and Tom, my answer changes every single time I have to answer this question, because as we were discussing earlier, it literally has been trial and error. I mean, who has been through a pandemic before? So where are our points of reference? I think in answering that question today, I would say it's more important, I mean, now more than ever, to embrace innovation. I think we knew before COVID that some of the traditional models associated with schools were sort of antiquated and not working for our students. And then COVID comes. And so the unique thing about COVID is COVID came in March. And so from March to June, we experienced the COVID slide. And then you have your traditional summer slide, which is a loss of learning that happens with students over the summer. And then lo and behold, there's another COVID slide. So we're looking at 3 separate instances of significant learning loss. And so my curriculum team and I, we just facilitated a research study around learning loss and found out, like, the prediction is that students will suffer a 30% loss in reading and a significantly higher loss in math of about 50%, right? And so what we've done in Edgecombe, if anyone is familiar with Edgecombe, we seem to be at the forefront of innovation. We'll try it. If we feel like it's been good for kids, we'll try it. Everything from our micro schools, other innovative models of learning. And so that's not new for us, but it sort of has given us a pathway for that to be more acceptable. And so in the spirit of that, we've just made a concerted effort to sort of personalize our needs based on what our students need or where our students are. And so, for example, when the pandemic first started, we worked really hard to establish learning pods at 4 of our schools, 1 of our elementary schools, 2 of our middle schools, and 1 of our at 1 of our high schools. Now, once we returned to school, we did not dissolve those learning pods. And so, for example, those learning pods were well attended and to this day are still well attended. And so those learning pods are for students, for example, who don't have access to internet, as we live in an extremely rural area and some of our townships don't have internet access available. So it's not a matter of whether or not you can afford it, it's just not available even if you could. They can come to learning pods and get instructional support. If there are students who need a little more structure or additional help, because maybe parents work or there's no one at home to facilitate that, then they can come in small groups in our learning pods and still get the face-to-face learning resources and technology access to help them be successful. Also, we're trying to be proactive around countering the learning loss. So we're looking at after school programs, virtual tutoring has been going on, summer academies. We've been looking at acceleration academies that have been going on in California to help focus on the content loss, not the performance loss, but really looking at the content loss. In terms of engagement strategies, being on a call with some of my NERISA assistant superintendent friends, what I found is that the engagement decline is common across North Carolina and it's happening in huge numbers. What we've done is we've just tried to be more vigilant around home visits, who does those home visits so that they don't seem threatening or punitive in any way. Principals, teachers, social workers, all hands on deck. We've also made extra efforts. We have an amazing community liaison, making connections with parents, finding out what they need, providing those resources. And then also 5 of our schools have built into their schedules advisory times. And so those students know every day they have an adult who they're comfortable connecting with, who's going to keep in touch and check on them and find out what's going on and get them the things that they need. And so I think like building those type of relationships and being able to understand what those needs are and personally address them has been a benefit for us. Has it eliminated the engagement gap? Absolutely not. But has it helped? Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
From a school system perspective, and with your keen equity lens on both individually and knowing that that's an important lens for the Edgecombe County Public Schools, what have been the most successful strategies in reaching out and supporting the families of your most vulnerable students?
Absolutely. So I've always described Dr. Bridges, who's our superintendent, as a leader of head and heart. For example, um, when the pandemic threw us into remote learning, her primary focus was, let's start addressing some social emotional needs before we send packets home. And that's what our focus was that first week. So our counselors and student support services got together, and we just tried to anticipate how kids would feel, whether they were anxious or they felt isolated or they felt confused. So we wanted them in a good headspace. And so she is a huge advocate and proponent for holistic learning. So making sure that like all needs are met. And I know that's not new, but for me, it makes me very proud to work in a district where that is the priority. And so for us, it looked like deciphering all of the factors that would lead to lack of learning or lack of engagement. And for example, since March of 2020, our child nutrition department has served over 1 million meals. We made sure that families were fed every day of the week. So they had enough food for 7 days since March of last year. Because we all know if kids aren't well, if they aren't fed, they can't learn. And so we wanted to make sure that was taken care of. Of course, we've gone above and beyond with social emotional learning and mental health support for our students and our staff. Provision of hotspots and devices for those that would help. And so what that has done is it has not only provided students the ability to join in virtual learning, but if they needed independent help, such as HillRap or iReady or virtual after school lessons or evening lessons, we looked at like parent schedules. Parents work during the day. And so we had teachers available at night. And so being able to have those devices and still have those connections and receive that support with teachers was helpful as well. Of course, I talked earlier about our learning pods, which have been a huge success. Schools focusing on establishing genuine relationships with parents and families. It's so much stuff. Most of all, grace and flexibility. So being mindful and truthful about those disparities that exist and really being intentional about addressing those without being condescending in a way. And so in our strategic plan, there is an action item that has an equity focus. And so Dr. Bridges has been working with leadership around equity leadership. And I think that has made a difference in how we approach some of the disparities that exist. But to do that first, you have to be truthful about things that exist in terms of biases and thoughts and systemic ideas that may prevent us from being equitable, and it's especially during this time to those populations who need us the most.
Right. So for our principals out there that are leading our schools every day and have been doing this in particular remote learning since March to some varying degree, knowing that the larger decisions about schools' schedules are really governed based on state data, state policies, as well as local board policies. What closing thoughts do you have for our principals as they continue to serve their communities and their staffs moving forward that you think would be your kind of encouragement to them?
Having worked in Edgecombe and the principals here watching them transition, don't be afraid to advocate for innovation if it's going to better serve your students. You can't be afraid of the word no, but I think having that regret and as it relates to doing what's best for our students is something you don't want to live with. So even if your district is not ready or your board is not ready, just go to bed at night knowing I advocated for what was right for my students, even if it didn't look like the way we think it's supposed to look. And I say that with air quotes. So that's what I would stress as new leaders. I think that's going to take you a really long way.